Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the IIIT Al-Faruqi Memorial Lecture. My name is Zaid Adhami. I'll be moderating tonight's event. I am a faculty member in the religion department at Williams College on the opposite corner of the country. And I have the honor today of moderating this lecture with Dr. Hatem Bazian. Very brief. I mean, the information about the memorial lecture and reception is up here for you to kind of get a sense, but just very briefly, Dr. Ismail Al-Faruqi, many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with him, but he was a co-founder of the the International Institute of Islamic Thought, IIIT, which has been an important publishing house and forum for Muslim thought, and as well as the Association of Muslim Social Scientists, and was also played an important part in the establishment of the study of Islam at the AAR. And this lecture that has been going on for some years is in honor of his legacy and his life and legacy and his contributions to our field and to our community. And you know, is an important space for that, and also very generously feeds us and is an opportunity for us to network and get to know one another. And so Dr. Al-Faruqi also, you know, has a wide range of works on a lot of topics that was very important. And so those works are available here to be browsed, and if you would like to pick something up, they are available to be taken complimentary after the event. So today we have the honor of listening to Dr. Hatem Bazian, who is a professor at University of California, Berkeley, in the Middle Eastern languages and cultures and Asian diaspora studies. And Dr. Bazian doesn't really need much of an introduction. Many of us know him, but is a decolonial scholar centering Islamic epistemology in his work and examining the contemporary world through the perspective of the global South. And is the author of a number of books, including the Erasing the Human, The Collapse of the Post-Colonial World, and the Immigration Refugee Crisis in Palestine. Dr. Bazian also is a co-founder of Zaytuna College in Northern California, and the president of the Northern California Islamic Council. So without further ado, and today's his talk will be titled Palestine from Columbus's Crusade to Herzl's Zionism and Settler Colonialism. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bazian.
السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So we meet today in this colonized land of 5 Native American tribes. 5 distinguished American Indian groups were present here in San Diego when the Spanish settlers first arrived. Native people lived in villages with sustainable food sources in the environment and depended heavily on small animals and fishing. As Palestinians, we have to center the history and narrative of colonized people and link our collective narratives whenever we speak. We also are beneficiaries in small and significant ways of the free labor and enslavement of our Black brothers and sisters, whose struggles to continue to define the moral arc of this country despite overwhelming odds. The gains of the civil rights movement in the 1960s are a work in progress. 1 step forward and 2 steps back, as MLK said in his speech, 3 Evils of Society. The long road toward equality, justice, and ending structural racism has been the hallmark of our Black brothers and sisters in this country, and we stand on their shoulders anytime that we speak at this point. Now, we are at this convention at a time where already upward of 250,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed. Let me repeat. We are at this convention where upward of 250,000 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli military. 73% of all the buildings have been destroyed. 70% of the dead are women and children. 192 journalists have been killed by the Israeli military. 12 universities have been completely destroyed. Some 38 hospitals have been set to ruin. All schools are either destroyed or have limited functionality, since many under UNRWA are used to house the almost 90% of the Palestinians that are displaced in Gaza. Israeli policy is having the effect of famine in the north and just yesterday in the south, and no end to this genocide in sight. Now, the ICC arrest warrants provide possible hope amid multifold darkness, and 123 countries are obligated to act upon the ICC arrest warrant. Just today, 13 hours ago, Israeli Air Force bombed the last standing mosque in the Nusayrat refugee camp, Al-Faruq Mosque. Yet, as many of you walking around the convention halls and possibly around the city, is almost total silence, as nothing happened, even though we are a community that studies religion. It seems that there is religion, and then Muslims are taken on the side as an exception to the norm. The United States is an obstacle to peace and justice, with the Biden administration being a partner in the genocide. Now, notice I say a partner in the genocide, not complicity. Those are two separate categories. Providing Netanyahu and his government all the means needed to systematically destroy Palestinian civilian life and civilian life. Arab and Muslim life are systematically destroyed. Arab and Muslim world leaders are, for the most part, complicit in assisting in the genocide. I don't leave anybody out. Jordan, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Morocco have been at the forefront of supporting the genocide and lending a helping hand by allowing much of the needed resources, if not the use of their airspace and ports, to transport all the needed equipment and supplies for Israel to carry on its genocide. We are witnessing the total collapse of World War II international legal order, with the 4 Geneva Convention, the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, the UN Charter, and the Genocide Convention all being shredded, and I would say with limited recycling options left. The question is why the Western world, the supposed custodian of the world order, many of us were believing that they're actually upholding international law, but again, that's our fault rather than the reality. The question is why the Western world, the supposed custodian of the world order, is co-producing the genocide, and how to understand the current era by looking at the past. Today's IIIT Ismail Faruqi's memorial lecture in the current circumstances and the genocide we are living and live streaming is a befitting tribute and stretching Faruqi's work on Palestine. Delivering the annual Ismail Faruqi Memorial Lecture is both an honor at this point and also at utmost responsibility. Dr. Ismail Faruqi, a Palestinian whose intellectual legacy we're celebrating, dedicated his life to addressing his time's pressing moral and philosophical challenges, particularly those facing the Muslim Ummah and the Palestinian people in particular. His vision of justice, pluralism, and the defense of human dignity continues to inspire us as we confront some of the most enduring struggles in human history. Al-Faruqi's short but insightful book, Islam and the Problem of Israel, was ahead of its time and gave a profound critique of Zionism, which many of us continue to build upon in the current period. Now, the title of my talk today is connected to Faruqi's critique of Zionism, Palestine from Columbus Crusades to Herzl Zionism and settler colonialism. This exploration traverses centuries, examining the ideological and material forces shaping Palestine history, from the European Crusades and colonial expansion to Christian Zionism, the emergence of Zionism and its ongoing impact. If I have time, I will also speak to the emergence of Muslim Zionism and its impact in the current period. My task today is to connect three seemingly unconnected themes that span more than 500 years. However, once examined deeply, they will provide a seamless, coherent whole. At least that's what I hope to accomplish. One is Columbus' journey across the Atlantic. Second, the emergence of Herzl Zionism, and lately settler colonialism in Palestine with its immediate consequences, the unfolding genocide. And lastly, some comments on Muslim Zionism. Edward Said pointedly observed that history is written by those who do the writing. And we know that anyone that studies the history of much of the world has been written by the colonized worlds. So history is written by those who do the writing, whose societies are advanced enough to afford the material and human resources to produce records, historical records of the past. The Global South challenge, including Palestine, history remains centered on the colonizer's narrative and not the colonized past, present, and future horizons. Israel has the right to defend itself, is the colonizer narrative. The Palestinians are supposed to accept occupation, dehumanization, colonization, dispossession, and in essence, appeal for the West to possibly look at them and consider them for a moment that they are human. Today, let's attempt to reorient Palestine history through a decolonial lens to better center the colonized and not erase the colonizer, but understand colonizers' logic in Palestine. Now, what is the connection to Columbus, which is really an important question at this point? Dating Palestine contemporary dilemma is an ongoing scholarly conversation. Is it only a matter of the 19th and early 20th century with the emergence of nationalism and recent Western interventionist policies? Now, Rashid Khalid's work, who covers the most recent period, 19th and early 20th century, is a must read, and I do agree with much of his work. It is a longer array of 4,000 years of history in the work of Professor Noor Masalha, also an important to read and engage. I am indebted to both contributions, but would like to complicate matters by engaging the 1492 and Columbus's Crusades. Indeed, Palestine modern history begins with the European Crusades in the late 11th century to the late 13th century, which I argue gave birth to contemporary Christian Zionism, a theology and ideas that predate and ground the emergence of Zionism among Western Jewish population. So actually, Christian Zionism predates Jewish Zionism. The Crusades campaigns justified under the banner of liberating the Holy Land were foundational in shaping Western attitudes toward Palestine and the broader Middle East, if I may, a colonial term, born out of the British Empire and its colonial discourses. For the Crusaders, Palestine was not merely a physical territory, but a symbol, a locus of religious salvation and geopolitical power. The Crusades were an early form of proto-settler colonialism, characterized by violent displacement and genocide of indigenous population. One can also add pogroms against the Jewish population across Europe as the Crusaders went out from France, Germany, and other parts of Europe. Every place and every town they set upon where Jewish populations were present, they ended up committing pogroms against them. The Crusades were an early form of proto-settler colonialism characterized by violent displacement and genocide of indigenous populations. Crusading societies, a term that I'm borrowing from Professor Adnan Hussein, which he has coined and is beginning to work on, committed to negating and eliminating the other, emerged during this period. Christopher Columbus himself was a product of this crusading ethos. In Lies My Teacher Told Me, historian James Lowen notes that Columbus carried with him the spirit of the Reconquista, a crusade that expelled Muslims and Jews from Spain in 1492. His voyages to what colonialism named the Americas were explicitly tied to a vision of global Christendom that sought to extend European dominance over new and old lands. Palestine, though distant, remained central to his vision as the Promised Land, an idea that would later resonate and inform Zionist ideology. Now, Washington Irving was the first to draw attention to Columbus' crusading aim of conquering Jerusalem. His 4-volume work, A History of the Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus, describes Columbus's objective as, quote, the discovery of the New World, the conversion of Gentiles to Christianity, and the recovery of the Holy Sepulchre. 3 events which he proposed to be predestined to succeed each other. The late Professor Abbas Hamadani from Wisconsin mentions Irving's work in his article, Columbus and the Recovery of Jerusalem, Journal of the American Oriental Society. Hamadani referenced the work of John Phelan and his Millennial Kingdom of the Franciscans, which examines the Franciscan connection of Columbus and the evolution of Columbus's mind. Phelan thinks that in 1492 and 1498, Columbus was motivated by the conventional crusading ideal. In 1501 and 02, however, Columbus linked the crusading tradition to a vision of himself as a Messiah. This view would accord with the general argument that it does not indicate only a symbolic or a metaphorical conquest of Jerusalem, for Columbus was not satisfied with an imaginary conquest, but for an actual military crusade. His genuine desire was for the actual deliverance of Jerusalem from Muslim hands and to open a new route for doing this. This could be done, according to Columbus, in 3 ways. 1, by contacting the pro-Christian Mongol Grand Khan in the east, to which he was supposedly going via the westward ocean route. This would bring Western and Eastern Christianity into common struggle to recover Jerusalem from Muslim rule. By using the resources of the newly discovered lands to conquer Jerusalem within 3 years, by force, and also by engaging in political machination. In some other references, it says that some ideas were actually if they would take over Mecca, and in the case that they are unsuccessful, they will exchange Mecca for Jerusalem that would be in the hands of Muslims. Now, a similar study of Columbus's ultimate goal, Jerusalem by Carol Delaney in the Comparative Studies in Society and History, also brings out these issues. Delaney said, even fewer know that his ultimate goal, the purpose behind the enterprise, was Jerusalem. She further says that the 26th December 1492 entry in Columbus's journal voyage, written in the Caribbean, he says he wanted to find enough gold and valuable spices in such quantity that the sovereign, meaning Spanish sovereign, will undertake to prepare to go conquer the Holy Sepulchre. For thus I urge to spend all profit of this my enterprise on this conquest. Delaney says this statement implies that it is not the first time Columbus had mentioned the motivation for his undertaking, nor was it to be the last. It was very clear that Columbus wanted to launch a new crusade to take back the Holy Land from the infidels, meaning the Muslims. This desire was not really to claim the land of the Bible and the place where Jesus walked. It was part of the much larger and widespread apocalyptic scenario in which Columbus and many of his contemporaries believed. This scenario, Delaney maintains, is derived from the biblical book of Revelation, which claims that the conversion of all peoples to Christianity and the reconquest of Jerusalem are necessary preconditions for the second coming when Jesus Christ will return before the end of days. Columbus felt strongly about the imminence of this event, he had a provisional role in the drama. There is considerable evidence from his contemporaries and his writings, especially his writing, especially in the book of prophecies, that these were long-standing beliefs for Columbus. So the basic narrative that tells us that Columbus sailed across the ocean, but never we are informed of why. What was the motivation? What was the inspiration behind Columbus? So literally throughout his diaries, he is actually writing about the reconquest of Jerusalem and a crusade from the east, trying to convince the Grand Khan in the east, who were thought to be a pro-Christian Khan, and as such launched this crusade to almost encircle the Muslims from the east. Far from Columbus's journey being solely for commercial trade, which we often are informed, at the heart of the enterprise was a crusading spirit that eventually succeeded, not linearly over 3 years, but in a complex and discursive unfolding of events: empire, colonization, genocide, death, and destruction, which we are still witnessing today. Now, Palestine, situated at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, was a focal point for European colonial ambitions, with the crusading mindset never far behind. Even though we speak about post-Christian Europe, the epistemology is still very much well founded and established. Edward Said's concept of Orientalism helped us understand how the West conceptualized of Palestine during this period. In Orientalism, he argued the Orient was not merely discovered, but invented. Portrayed as backward and needing Western intervention, Palestine in particular was romanticized as a land of biblical antiquities, erasing its contemporary Arab and Muslim inhabitants, and the long history of the region and all its diverse people. Columbus' journey in 1492 opened the doors for the modern colonial enterprise, which has been critical overarching thesis to account for the world we live in today and what is needed to enter into a decolonizing horizon to understand the world that we are all living in. I will list what I consider to be the 7 critical overarching theses for colonization, not being able to go through all of them, but just briefly. 1, Western global project. Colonization was a Western colonial project that covered 85% of the known world surface. It was a commercial project, economic project, raw material and markets. We still vested in that. Military industrial complex, developing and perfecting death machines, including at universities. Racism, developing a racial matrix and hierarchy that values certain humans more than others. We see it both in relations to Palestine, but domestically in here, in terms of valuing some lighter bodies more than darker bodies. Genocide all across the global south. You could actually trace almost the multiple genocides with India, the Congo, Algeria, you name it. Every place that colonization went left a distinctive genocide, if not multiple genocide, and we're living in a continent that have experienced massive genocide. Western imperial Christianity, imperial religion to justify colonization and make it to be sanctioned by God. And then epistemological structures and ways of knowing. We live in a world defined, shaped, and engaged by colonization. And if we don't realize this, we think that we have actually arrived at a post-colonial or decolonial era. Take, for example, the British Empire in India. The British arrived in India around 1601, acquiring land in 1640, and establishing control in 1757 by the East India Company. The East India Company had 167,000 private army. Today, you could compare it to the private contractors, 70,000 we used in Iraq, 30,000 we used in Afghanistan, and yet it passes as business as usual. In 1858, when the colony was transferred to the crown in the person of Queen Victoria, who became literally the owner of India, the British had ruled India indirectly and directly from 1640 until 1948. a period that witnessed total pillaging and reducing the country to abject poverty by stealing 45 trillion sterling pounds worth of goods. India was accounted for 25% of the global GDP when the British arrived. When they left, they reduced it to 3% of the global GDP. The British colonization of India opened the door to the colonization of Yemen, the Persian Gulf, Egypt, Sudan, and eastern coast of Africa, not to mention other parts of Africa that got colonized and divided among European powers, the French, Dutch, Belgium, Italy, Germany, Spain, and Portugal. The term Middle East, which we often have in many of our departments that are called Middle East, the term Middle East was brought into circulation out of the British India policy. And the Columbus crusading vision possibly was actualized by the British 300 years thereafter, but nevertheless, the British actually finally captured India, and through capturing India, went ahead to capture Yemen and Egypt, two countries that are still central to Western domination of the region. Not coincidental, but actually part and parcel of colonial history and legacy. In 1920, if one person looked at the world, then it would have been 85% colonial landmass, and the global South was subject to European colonization, with an epistemology rooted in crusading vision, forced conversion to Christianity, racist structures, and genocidal policies. Palestine, need to remember, is the last settler colony to be commissioned at the beginning part of the 20th century. After World War I, after Wilson's 14 points of self-determination, after the League of Nations, Palestine was the last settler colony to be commissioned, and that has to be understood within that context. From Columbus's journey to west to European powers arriving to India, China, and the East, then opening the doors to Muslim world from the East, a certain link may be established. It might not be a straight link, but the link has to be established and understood. Coming to the emergence of Zionism and Herzl colonial vision. Theodor Herzl, often regarded as the father of modern political Zionism, was deeply influenced by the currents of European colonization. In his seminal work, Der Judenstaat, Herzl articulated a vision of Jewish homeland as a solution to the anti-Semitism rampant in Europe. Herzl's proposal, while seeking liberation for Jewish people, was grounded in the colonial framework of his time. He never shied away from calling it is something colonial. The process for the acquisition of Palestine as a Jewish homeland did not begin with the first conference of World Zionist Organization in 1897. Rather, it evolved over a long period of time. European penetration into Syria and Egypt. Prior to the actual takeover by the British, then Zionism triumphantly in 1948 with the state formation. Europe had two questions at its gate, both races, the Jewish question and the Eastern question, which is the Muslim question, Islamophobia. The groundwork for colonization project began during the 18th and 19th centuries and culminated in the first part of the 20th century as Great Britain managed to invade and occupy Palestine. The colonization and transformation of Palestine into a state for the Zionists went in hand with an attempt to solving Europe's racist historical Jewish problem, which I may add the Eastern question, i.e. the Muslim sentiment or the anti-Muslim sentiment. It is certain that European anti-Semitism framed the Jewish problem and saw Palestine or other parts of the Ottoman territory as the best way or the best option for solving its racist and historically and theologically constructed crisis. The option for addressing the Jewish problem through Palestine, which became the focus for both Zionists and driven by British interest, can be dated to a long-standing Christian Zionism and the end of time theology, and not separated from it. Part of the end of time theology called for reconstituting the Jews in Palestine, which was first and foremost a Christian theological position, not a Jewish position, that got adopted by the Zionists in late 19th century. In the mid-19th century, some Jewish leaders began to accept the ideas developed initially by the Christian Zionism and writing on this subject to actually formulate their way or their approach to addressing anti-Semitism. Europe's Jewish problem is not new, rather it's a constant one, and had defined the continent beginning in the Dark Ages, and I would argue all the way up to the present. Don't be confused with all these statements of supporting Israel as the homeland for the Jews, but it's contingent on all Jews going actually to Palestine, meaning that the Europeans still can have their anti-Semitism while being celebrated as supporters of Israel. We do have to realize that the Holocaust is the norm when it comes to Europe's treatment and engagement with Jews as the archetypal and constant other. It actually is completely different when often there's an attempt to collapse European anti-Semitism with relations of the Arab-Muslim world to Jews. Jewish-Muslim relations and coexistence is completely different than the history of European relations to the Jewish subjects across the history, especially in the Middle Ages, all the way up to the post-World War II. Before the Holocaust in the 20th century, Europe had managed to expel and force the conversion of Jews before, during, and after the Spanish Inquisition. The pogroms in Spain, Italy, Germany, Russia, and Eastern Europe point to Europe's major epistemic problem with the figure of the Jew that has its origin in biblical texts and the racism connected to it. Solving the Jewish problem always involved removing the Jewish individual and community from Europe, but never confronting the foundation of anti-Semitism itself. Thus, one must confront the colonial project in Palestine on three fronts at the same time. On the one hand, challenging European historical crusading epistemology. Second, understanding and countering contemporary anti-Semitism as it relates to the attempt to use Israel as the focal point for addressing anti-Semitism, while also simultaneously deconstructing the Zionist settler colonial projects and its acceptance to dispossess another people as the easy and only way out of Europe's otherization and racism. Indeed, Zionism's success in Palestine is not a defeat of European anti-Semitism. Let me repeat, Zionism's success in Palestine, and that question is still open, is not a defeat of European anti-Semitism, but accurately is actually its ultimate triumph, for it managed to remove the Jews from Europe while dispossessing the Palestinians at the same time. In which way does Zionism claim victory over European anti-Semitism? It's a real question. More importantly, in which way were the Arabs anti-Semitic prior to the emergence of Zionism and the dispossession of the Palestinians? And was this same type of problem that confronted Jews in Europe that we are seeing in relations to the Palestinians' opposition, confrontation with Zionism in Palestine? I would argue that Herzl and Zionist organization under duress and influenced by European colonialism and nationalism, as well as modernity, made the wrong alliances and end up internalizing and replicating European racist and colonial discourses on a population, the Palestinians, that under other circumstances and broader imagination would have been perfect allies to help bring about a different horizon in the world and a real confrontation of European anti-Semitism, racism, Islamophobia, and the long history of creating subhumanness across the global South. Today's contentious focus solely on the vagaries of the never-ending peace process, don't make me laugh, and the supposed inability to reach an agreement, rather than examining the derivation that pushed European Jews into Zionism womb, and then into a settler colonial project that continues to unfold in death and mayhem daily. Zionism, a secular nationalist movement, emerged and is a byproduct of Western and colonial theological epistemic and not separate from it. Even from early on, critical issues relative to Zionism, they understood that the Zionist movement and Herzl knew from the beginning that all along that Palestine was densely inhabited by a Palestinian Arab population that had been in existence on the land for thousands of years. They actually sent a delegation to survey Palestine, and it says the bride is beautiful, but it's already betrothed. Zionists viewed the Palestinian Arab through a Eurocentric and highly racist epistemic that made it possible to rationalize settler colonial discourses through Zionism, Western settler colonial project. A Jewish majority state was not possible without transferring the existing Palestinian population, voluntarily if possible, according to Herzl, but by any means necessary if needed. Now, notice today the discussion about Gaza in the first 2 weeks of this genocide, the discussion about Palestinians needing to actually be transferred. And if I may say, when Biden traveled to the Middle East to have a meeting in the region, all indication that Egypt was ready to take Palestinians, Jordan was ready to take Palestinians, because when the emperor arrived, the emperor gets what he wanted. But never actually asking the question, why should the Palestinians leave their homes, leave their lands, to allow the Zionism and Western history to unfold over their land? Violence constituting military force, genocide, and external support from a major Western power, which the United States is, are a must if the Zionist state is to have any possibility of success and continuity in the future. Palestine has been populated from the earliest period, and the only way to arrive at an empty or a land without a people for a people without a land is to empty the land of its people by force. 1948, 750,000 Palestinians were removed by force. And today we're witnessing another attempt to empty the Gaza Strip and possibly also the West Bank of its Palestinian population. Nur Masalha, in the introduction to his book, The Bible and Zionism, points out the state of Israel was built on all biblical symbols and legends. And modern Zionist myths and the Zionist claim to Palestine was based on the notion that God had given the land to Jews. What is critical for Nur Masalha is the question whether the Bible justifies political Zionism. One actually can ask the question whether the Bible justifies the crusading efforts of the past, or even the contemporary crusading that takes place in a variety of different ways. The military conquest and destruction of Palestine, and it is at the heart of the argument and justification pushed by Israeli spokespersons across the Western world. Even in hearings in Congress, we hear individuals citing the Bible as an evidence or a source to legitimately support Israel. The Bible has been used as an instrument to rationalize a host of pernicious historical undertakings in the past, including the Crusades, Inquisition, and colonialism, with the now completely discredited notion of manifest destiny, except we are actually asking people to give credence to Zionist manifest destiny over Palestine. Zionism settler colonial project in Palestine is a Christian theology implemented in the age of empire, using Jewish suffering in Europe as the gate to mobilize religious sentiments in the West and among segments of Western Jewish population. Let me repeat this. Zionism settler colonial project in Palestine is Christian theology implemented in the age of empire, using Jewish suffering in Europe as the gate to mobilize religious sentiments in the West and among a segment of Western Jewish population. Zionism and Israel are essentially reformulating and colonially framing Western Christian-centric manifest destiny directed at Palestine and its population. Masalha, in his book, The Bible and Zionism, correctly points out that the invention and mobilization of the ethnocentric paradigm of promised land, chosen people, and its links to modern Zionist myths, especially the nationalized and mythologized concept that the Hebrew Bible provides the Jews a sacrosanct title deed to the land of Palestine and beyond, signed by God, for the alleged moral legitimacy of the establishment of the state of Israel, for its policies toward the indigenous inhabitants of Palestine and the genocide. Masalha's work provides strong critique of Zion's founding myth that mobilized the biblical text in support of a secular colonial project. The list of critique of Zionism in Masalha's work include mythical gift of land to Abraham, which goes uncontested, and its conquest by Joshua, the myth of ubiquitous and perennial longing on the part of the Jewish diaspora to return, the myth of a land without a people, the deep-seated inclination among the Zionists to see Palestine as a country without its Arab inhabitants, the erasure of Palestinian villages and deletion of the reality of historic Palestine, the invention of a new Hebraic consciousness, and the historicization of the Bible as a collective national enterprise, biblical naming, and the Hebronization of Palestine's landscape and geographical sites. Hebron rather than Al-Khalil, Shechem rather than Nablus, Urshalim rather than Al-Quds. All this is part of this legacy, geographical sites since 1948, and archaeology in the service of settler colonialism, which we see. Zionism is about affirming European history through instrumentalization of Western production of Jewish suffering and anti-Semites through production of Jewish suffering and anti-Semitism. The Bible was central in developing modern European identity and projecting it into a progressive articulation of the past for Europe to arrive at its ascendancy and power. Controlling and conquering Palestine is affirming Europe's identity and its centrality in the unfolding universal history. Thus, the question of why these areas were lost from Western Christianity creates the epistemic foundation for the Crusades in the 11th century, a hostile and rejectionist entanglement with Muslim powers over the generation, and the renewed effort in winning back the Holy Land through machinations and colonialism. Not having Palestine meant that Europe's identity was incomplete, and its role in the unfolding history is unauthentic, or more importantly, corrective measures needed to be undertaken to reclaim what's truly ours. Europe's assigned role by means of the biblical text is to be the lords of history as the only agents for its unfolding. But this gets disrupted when the Holy Land is not under European Christian control. Controlling Palestine and the Holy Land for Western Christianity were symbolic and for some a divine affirmation of the veracity of Western Christianity, which also includes the setting up of an Israel as a stepping stone for Jesus' return to the world. Supporting Zionism is undertaken not as an act of generosity, as some might actually try to tell us on the part of Europe and the United States. On the contrary, it is with an eye toward the ultimate and final act of God in history, when Jesus does return and Western Christianity is vindicated for all that it has done in the service of this moment. Furthermore, defeating and pushing Muslims out of Palestine at present bring Western Christianity into a state of arrival at the true self-actualization and claims to the asserted universalism supported by controlling the holiest site in the entire world and the door into the unseen. Zionist settlers are space holders. Zionist settlers are space holders until the real emerges, and then they will have to step aside themselves, convert to Christianity, or face death for rejecting God's Son one more time. This is the evangelical position and dispensationalist theology. Now, Muslims, we don't even account. We're just the right hand of Satan, so don't worry about that. Right? We are certain that losing the East to Muslims has not been reconciled by the West. And rather than see the transformation as a possibility of willful and open conversion to Islam, Western powers of old and present problematize, demonize, and racialize the events that took place, becoming more hostile since the 15th century onward. Since Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub recaptured Jerusalem in 1187 after defeating the Crusaders' army in the Battle of Hittin on July 4th and bringing an end to an 88-year occupation of Jerusalem and reconstituting Muslim control of the city, a deeply held irredentism is present in Western discourse toward the Muslim world. The goal to claim the Holy Land back never stopped, for it represented the West's religious and political identity in the face of massive territorial and population losses to Islam, and the Crusades were lamented for what could have been rather than seeing and accepting the outcome for the fact that indigenous population had made its choice, and it was in being Muslim, Eastern Christian, and Eastern Jewish. The Crusades did not end the European search, but only pushed it into the future, including in the present context. I know that I have a few time. But let me move to the World War I, because the British defined their arrival in Palestine as a crusade. The Punch journal main caption on December 19th, 1917 declared the last crusade, showing Richard de Leon looking down toward Jerusalem and nodding contentedly, "My dream comes true." The British press was initially instructed in a private and confidential memo dated November 15, 1917, not to refer to the military operation against Turkey in any sense as a holy war, a modern crusade, or anything whatsoever to do with religious question. They moved quickly after, and in a short period of time after the instruction, to emphasize the centrality of religion in discussing the occupation of Jerusalem. From the government point of view, the reason for the memo was to prevent any possible friction with large Muslim troops recruited from British colonies to fight in the war, as well as the alliance with Sharif Hussein of Mecca against the Ottoman, meaning it was a purely PR memo to make sure that the Muslim troops, who were the frontline troops in the Eastern Front that came out of Egypt, as well as on the coast with Palestine, will stay committed to the British campaign and the Sharif Hussein. This private and confidential directives was very quickly set aside. As the article from the Punch shows, but more importantly, the British Department of Information itself began to use the term crusade and convey very distinctive religious and historical connections to earlier period. In a telegram wired from Palestine, the British Information Office mentioned two of the commanders who have played a great part in the South Palestine campaign are descendant from knights who fought in the wars of the Crusades. In addition, a few months after the conquest of Jerusalem, the Department of Information released a 40-minute official film entitled "The Crusades," with the British forces on the Palestine front, which once again articulated the adventure in the region in purely religious terms. Furthermore, in the period after World War I, a large number of published books had the Crusades incorporated into it. Quote, Khaki Crusades, 1919, Temporary Crusaders, 1919, The Modern Crusaders, 1920, The Last Crusade, 1920, with Alembis Crusaders, 1923, and The Romance of the Last Crusade, 1923. In a headline in the newspaper, actually, Jerusalem is captured after 672 years of Muslim rule. So what we're getting, again, the theme of crusading from Columbus continued into the British period. Now, I said if I have some time, maybe I'm gonna take 3 minutes because I wanna address the issue of Muslim Zionism, because it's something that is impacting and continue to have an impact. So we have Christian Zionism, Jewish Zionism, and the emergence of Muslim Zionism. We can say for sure that the current crop of Muslims who embrace Zionist settler colonialism are totally disconnected from Islamic epistemology and its justice-rooted message. The recent stampede by Arab and Muslim governments to join the Abraham Accord, which is going to be highlighted by Trump again, and framing it in reference to Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, is precisely point to this creeping Muslim Zionism. One can say many things about the Abraham Accord, but what we're certain about is that it's neither a peace accord to end settler colonialism in Palestine, nor has any connection to Islam or Islamic values. It was cooked by Jared Kushner and his father-in-law. At the root of the Abraham Accords are an attempt to bypass Palestinian sovereignty, rights to their land, and the right to return, while allowing Israel to develop economic, political, and social relations with the Arab and Muslim states. What is a Muslim Zionist? You ask. Muslim Zionism refers to normalization steps taken by Muslim individuals and states that seek to build relations with Israel and the Zionist settler colonial project in Palestine or abroad, while clothing it in Islamic epistemological, legal, or theological cloak. A ready cadre is marshaled to offer soothing Quranic or selected prophetic statements, all quoted out of context, but this does not stop them from deploying it in their discourses. The reading is no longer a high priority. This is done to sanction that which is beyond the pale, settler colonialism in Palestine. The Muslim Zionists are individuals who engage and center their relationship with Israel and Zionism while silencing, ignoring, demonizing, and blaming the Palestinians for the ongoing conditions in Palestine and genocide as well. Blaming the victims of settler colonialism, the Palestinians, is offered as evidence of their sophistication and upward mobility and intelligence in developing relations with Zionism. Muslim Zionism locates its agency, upward mobility, and access in circles of influence on the proximity and through the engagement with Jewish Zionism in the West, and never missing an opportunity to use Israel's speak to explain their action when challenged. Some hide behind a facade of not knowing what is going on. Maybe they should actually tune to TikTok, and are only focused on promoting tolerance and a positive image of Islam, no matter who is present. Some hide behind all this spiritual meaning and spiritual discourses as a way to avoid actually critiquing the politics that is in front of us. Muslim Zionists posit that Palestinian resistance has failed, and they, through their embrace of Israel and Zionism on a VIP constructed projects and strips, sports events, and joint investments, are actually helping the Palestinians. Now, don't make me laugh, but some actually believe this self-serving view of the world. Some of these Muslim Zionists go as far as stating that all their action is undertaken to push forward the goal of Palestinian freedom, but never at once asking the Palestinians themselves for their opinion on that matter. Others will come back to the problem. Others will always come back to the constant Zionist talking point of the suicide bombing that did not occur since 1997 as the major problem, while emphasizing their peaceful type of Islam is the one that should be given the stage, with Israeli representation at their side. The good Islam becomes represented by Muslim Zionists, while the bad Islam resides in Palestine, or anyone that expresses solidarity with the Palestinians. Muslim Zionists reflect Israel Hasbara talking points while being dressed up in defense of Islam clothing. Now, I want to just go off script right now just to speak about where are we heading at this point in relations to Palestine. I'm very optimistic despite the dark moments that Palestine is facing. I do feel that we have reached a tipping point that is irreversible, that the global phenomenon that we are seeing, the issuing of the arrest warrant by the ICC, even though I don't expect Netanyahu to be arrested anytime soon or Gallant, but the fact that the product or the state of Israel is no longer in a positive standing across the globe, this is a phenomena that is irreversible. The fact that you have countries across the world, including what I would say South Africa being in the lead, is a very significant, because South Africa was the last settler colony to be liberated in Africa, and it's actually helping in presenting the case of the last settler colony that is right now Palestine. So that also gives us hope and inspiration that the old world system, the colonial, colonial structure that we have witnessed and continue to witness, might be breathing its last breaths. It will be painful. I understand that we are seeing the massive suffering, but I am very optimistic that we will see a free Palestine in our time. It's no longer in the hands of political elite, even though they're attempting to close all possible avenues to maintain the status quo, but I don't think the status quo is defensible. And in Gaza, not only that the international legal order has been buried, but any notion of Western exceptionalism is no longer actually a point of discourse or a point of presentation. And I think those are the avenues and the places that we need to continue to do the work. And I'm very optimistic that college campuses, the students, the universities are taking the lead, because they always were on the right side of history. They were on the right side of history during the suffrage movement. They were in right history in Vietnam, right side of history, free speech movement, in the anti-apartheid movement, and today they are on the right side of history, despite the overwhelming odds that are being arrayed. It's only as a result of failing, the paradigm has failed, and when the paradigm is failed, you only resort to power. And in resorting to power, that's an admission of total failure of the paradigm not its rescue. So as such, I'm very optimistic despite the difficult moment that the Palestinians are living and much of our global south as well. So Jazakumullah khair, and thank you for listening.
So we have about 30 minutes for questions and discussion with Dr. Bazian. So yeah, feel free to raise your hands and
I think your book, Palestine is something colonial. You have sort of called to de-theologize the struggle, right, and recognize that sort of freeing a cosmic narrative, as you just laid out, to the situation on the ground is not particularly helpful. But after listening to everything you just said in light of the last year, I feel like it's hard for Muslims not to want to re-theologize that struggle. And I would like your thoughts and guidance on that. What you said is true about the sort of Christian and Jewish side of the equation.
Yeah, and the
It's
Muslim.
still at play right now. Sort of, there's something in me that wants to jump to the re-theologizing of that struggle.
Well, I don't dismiss the role religion can play in liberation. We do have something called liberation theology, right? But we need to make a distinction between liberation theology and what I call imperial theology. Colonization, colonial discourses have embraced colonial theology and imperial theology, where we think power and embracing the emperor and being at the court of the emperor is what theological discourses and religion is about. I do believe that religion is a source of liberation, but it also has to be understood religion of the folks of the street, in the marketplace, everyday regular people that want to liberate themselves. So I do read religion in a different way and liberation theology in a different way. It does have a role. And if you look at the history of liberation theology and what it did, it was, has tremendous impact. What I'm insisting is that to use imperial theology is what we have a fundamental problem to in terms of accepting or giving credence to both in terms of colonial history as well as the contemporary period. And I think both Christian Zionism, Jewish Zionism, and increasingly Muslim Zionism really are partaking in imperial religion and trying to offer a way to maintain the status quo and cloak it in a divine purpose, which I think it has no divine purpose whatsoever other than pure worship of power. And I think that's what we need to critique.
I think my question is something I've been thinking about for a while, and I attended an Islamic conference, and there was a panel of Palestinian / Palestinian American speakers on the panel, and they were pushing for BDS.
BDS,
Right. And I also push for BDS, my own personal and economic life. At the same time, I feel a sense of guilt in living in America, where my tax dollars that I'm paying is going for the BDS that I'm pushing for, right? And we had a Palestinian come to a charity event in Chicago, and she came in and she had a amputated leg, and they were serving ice cream at the event. I thought I was eating my own blood, in the ice cream. And so, can you talk about how you personally reconcile living in America and doing that, and how we can live with that?
Well, Palestinians, for the most part, we are stateless people. Even the population of Gaza are internationally dependent people in terms of their classification. The only group of Palestinians that have citizenship are the ones that are in Jordan. And so you have a precarious existence for Palestinians, and how for the some that make it to the United States, to Europe, to even some parts of the Arab world, there's definitely some part of you that think about the trauma of people facing the consequences of U.S. foreign policy. You could think of the Iraqi population, 1.5 million Iraqis, the Afghans. In here, one has to, segment, right, where your individual responsibility versus the circumstances that you find yourself. And we have to be able to at least navigate the difficulty of living in a country that has inflicted tremendous pain, not only on the Palestinians, but I would say in many countries across the global south. Thus, I would say for me, it energizes for me to do more work, to continue to involve, to be, I know that's a cliche, to be the light in the middle of the darkness, right? And not let the darkness define what my actions are. I need to be a person that constantly try to change the circumstances within my sphere of influence and capacity. And as such, we need to continue to do so. I do believe that BDS is very critical and a very important tool. We used it very strongly during the South Africa anti-apartheid movement, and it did make an impact. And I do think that it's beginning to make an impact in here. If you just followed both the quarterly releases of Starbucks and the quarterly releases of McDonald's, both have been trounced as a result of the PDS movement. Right? Now, people need to understand, in a PDS campaign, you are not going to shut down the company totally. What you need is to affect a certain percentage of its profit margin. In a highly competitive market, a 3 percentage point or 4 percentage point in a market that is highly competitive, that can make the difference between success, expansion, or contraction of a company. And as such, they understood that would be the profit margin that are there. If you notice, Starbucks sales, I think it was declined by 4%. They were projecting prior that it's actually going to be an increase. So they were trounced. Yesterday, I got the news, 50 branches of Starbucks closed in, I think, Indonesia. All right. Egypt have people no longer are going to Starbucks, so they also closed many of their branches. In such a highly competitive market with a very narrow margin, you are able to affect that margin. And then the second is you make possible for people to consider whether other companies want to enter into the Israeli market, knowing the impact within a PDS movement. And it's a long struggle, but that's the strategy that are to be pursued. And you have to also be very selective. I am against sending 2,000 companies to people say boycott these companies. I am for targeted boycott with a strategy and have an impact in there. So I know that there is, if you have choice and you have a scanner, you have an option, you could do that. But the strategy is to actually pursue specific campaigns with multi-layer strategies in order for you to effect in that way, rather than tell an individual a list like this book, say, boycott all these. You will actually leave the person just basically becoming immobilized.
Thank you very much for your penetrating analysis and bold analysis. And as a long-term member of AAR, Kurt Richardson, Institute for Abrahamic Relations. It's shameful how absent in the entire catalog the whole subject is. And so your speech stood out, had to come. You mentioned, though, the complexity of the spectrum that we're looking at here. There are Muslim Zionists.
Mm-hmm.
It would be helpful, however, it's a little bit like a 9/11 situation academic. We're never going to be the same after this. There is a study of Zionism like never before, and you've identified it. It is a Euro-American Jewish colony, the last one. And right now, the aimlessness, the confusion of the Israeli military is, in a sense, partly floundering because the U.S. Army is not present. The Navy is,
but boots on the ground are not going in. We'll see. But it would be helpful to also acknowledge the Jews that are pro-Palestinian.
Oh, yeah, the Jewish
Right.
voice for peace, for sure.
And then theologically, there is an unparalleled Jewish critique of Zionism now. And for instance, Rabbi Shapiro's massive study.
Yeah.
And his critique, it would be helpful to tap into this for all of us. Because then finally, a third piece here are the non-involvements of all the Arab states. So only terrorists have joined the fight. And it's embarrassing sometimes, it's shameful other times. By November of last year, in December, UAE was saying, this has nothing to do with the eventuality of the Abraham Accords, Abraham Accord 5. MBS has reinforced that over the summer. He is now using the language of genocide, but given Yemen, he knows how to negotiate that. There is some kind of future, it seems like, between Saudi Arabia and Israel or the Middle East. Possibly a lessened colonialism. Something that they just simply carry forward on their own if this alliance appears. Or do you think, some people think the Abraham Accords are just gone, but I don't think they are. Maybe you could comment.
Well, I don't think that the Abraham Accords are gone. Not because they're not what you call completely atrocious for the Palestinians, is the United States, Israel, and the current participant in the Abraham Accords, which is United Arab Emirates, Morocco, Jordan, Bahrain, Egypt, and all indications Saudi Arabia is ready to sign the Abraham Accords. They're looking for a right deal. The fact that MBS just a week ago dropped the word genocide, this just for internal consumption. So I do feel that the Trump administration is going to push heavily for the Abraham Accord. I do think that Saudi Arabia will sign, at least that's my reading of it. They've already been normalizing relations with the Zionists here in the US through the Office of the Muslim League. The head of the Muslim League has been hobnobbing around with AJC, APAC people, and so on. So my sense that's going forward. Abraham Accord is centered on bypassing the Palestinian right to self-determination and statehood, and therefore is destined to almost to the dustbin of history, because it's attempting to bypass the fundamental question in the region, which is freedom for the Palestinians, their right to their land, their right of return, and that is unanswerable by the Abraham Accord. My sense also that Trump might be actually the worst, might lead the worst outcome for Israel, because it gets all what it wants. And sometimes getting all what you want might not be what you actually need. In the sense that Trump is thinking that this is the final solution for Palestine. He has all the pieces in place. He has given recognition that he will issue an executive order to recognize Israel annexation of Area B and C, which leaves the Palestinians only in Area A. He already recognized annexation of the Golan Heights. And I don't know if the Gaza circumstances will continue until January, but if it did, he might also ask Netanyahu to finish the job, which means commit a genocide and expulsion for the Palestinians. If that happens, for me, that is Israel reaching the point of no return for any possibility of future reconciliation with the Arab person in the street. What Israel and the United States is completely deluded. They think a signature of MBS, a Sisi, King Abdullah bin Zaid, and so on, translate to actually an acceptance and normalization of Israeli individual in the mind, social, cultural horizons in the region. What Israel has done over this past year has completely made it almost beyond reparation to be able to come into any consideration with the Arab person, Muslim person. And you're talking about a 2 billion people market of ideas. That's where I think the diplomats that are talking, they're consuming oxygen, but they're not producing an understanding of what is the epistemological transformation that has occurred across the Muslim world, but also across other parts of the world. Africa is just completely beyond repair for Israel's standing. The fact that Latin American countries, if you notice, Lula of Brazil leading the march for Palestine in Brazil, Colombia closing the Israeli embassy, right? Israel standing completely collapsed. Italy, Spain, even the Netherlands said that they will respect the arrest warrant from the ICC. So I would say that what we're experiencing is two divergent track. The Abraham track is being managed by what I consider to be people that are functioning within the diplomatic circle, completely disconnected. They respond to Israel initiative, motivations, relations, links to AJC, APAC, ADL, the Israel project and so on, while the bulk of populations have completely now, I would say, beyond the ability to come into consideration of a future relations with anything that Israel can put forth. That, for me, is what is taking place. And that's what I say we reached a tipping point that is irreversible and cannot be brought back. And on the question of the question on the Jewish active, we've been working very closely, Jewish Voice for Peace, if not now, the International Anti-Zionist Jewish Coalition. All these are, collectively working of a profound critique. We also have a group that is working with Christian Zionism simultaneously to have a conversation. So I'm very optimistic also that, especially among the young generation, there's a total collapse of Israel brand among the young Jewish generation in America. And that's been historically the bread and butter for organizing for Zionism. And I think that is already lost a whole generation.
Perhaps I could step out of my role as moderator for a second and ask a question. I don't see a hand. Just thinking about this from the perspective of teaching, because some of us teach in environments where Christian nationalism and the right is very present, but some of us teach in this environment that's like very liberal, secular environment. And so I'm thinking the way you structured your talk as like Zionism as rooted in a Christian theology, and then kinds of Jewish and Muslim adaptations of that from the crusading but to the evangelical. But how I think that's very important in terms of teaching to students to show that history. But then what about the kind of like post-Christian secular adaptation of Zionism? The Democratic Party is not the evangelical Zionism. And so in terms of understanding that shift conceptually, but also conveying to students, like what is going on in terms of that inheritance of the crusading Christian Zionism to a kind of post-Christian secular version of it?
Well, the crusading epistemic has been secularized.
Right.
It is still at the hub of the same type of discourse. The terms of debate are set from the right, and the left adopt and negotiates its position on it. Just notice all of the actions that Trump did in 2016-17 when he came, the Democrats have not reversed, right? So you still are able to speak about the history in relations to the history of Christianity, Christian Zionism, and its impact on the overall discourse, even in a secular framing, where it actually been adopted into the secular discourses. You add to it also the almost the imbibing of Islamophobic discourses by the left. We tend to think of Islamophobia on the right, but Islamophobia on the left is as present, and that is also an inheritance from the crusading period that gets to be articulated in so-called secular notions relative to who the Muslim is and is not. I think if you just, not that I want you to do that, but if you have the stomach to listen to Bill Maher, right, he just represents that stream of so-called liberal discourses that is heavily Islamophobic, and every once in a while he actually quotes the Bible, which is, for me, is just like an odd, because he's the he posits himself as being anti-religion, right? But then he argues that Israel's right to exist is in the Bible. MashaAllah, it's like he's sophisticated in his logic, right? On the one hand, he asserts his anti-religious, ethos, but then at ease deploys this. And I think you see that within the democratic circles, almost constantly.
Any other final questions? We have about 5 minutes. If anybody has anything remaining to ask or contribute. All right, then we will, if there's nothing, we can close there. I'm sure there's extra food, so I imagine they would invite you to take leftovers with you, given how expensive food is around here. And as mentioned before, there are Dr. Ismail Faruqi's books are available to browse and take one or two if you're interested. And thank you very much, Saulat, for organizing this, and the IIIT, and Dr. Bazian for the amazing lecture. Thanks so much.